Introduction to Sensation and Perception. And as promised in the syllabus of one of the early things we're going to learn is this difference between sensation and perception. So sensation is the sense organs gathering information about the environment. We don't actually distinguish that much anymore between sensation and perception because most of how sensation works we have known for quite a while, and what we're really interested in the field is how cognitive processes affect perception, how perception affects cognitive processes, and those other questions. But if we're just looking at what's happening at the level of the sensory organs themselves, that is sensation. So I can use this example of detecting pressure on a finger, or I actually like the example better of someone rubbing your arm up and down. So someone's touching your arm and rubbing up and down. You can imagine that detection of that rubbing. That's going to be the same in all of my examples. What is happening is there are mechanoreceptors, these different receptors in your skin that are telling you about that very slight pressure and the change over time. And the perception then is the brain's organization and interpretation of those sensations. And so someone's rubbing up and down on my arm, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples, or actually I'm going to give you 3 examples of how I might perceive this really differently depending on different contexts. So in the first context, I'm watching a scary movie with someone I'm interested in, and they start rubbing up and down on my arm. And I'm probably interpreting that as something that is comforting and reassuring to some extent, and maybe bonding. Second scenario, I'm going through the airport and the TSA agent rubs up and down on my arm. That's a really different perception, right? Again, the sensation is the same. There are these mechanoreceptors that are responding to a slight pressure in a temporal kind of in a certain kind of timing, and I'm sensing that, but the perception is very different than being reassuring or having a sense of bonding. It is now, I don't care that much maybe, but maybe it's a little uncomfortable. It depends on how you feel about that kind of thing, about being touched by strangers. Third scenario, you're walking down a dark alley by yourself and suddenly you feel somebody rubbing up and down on your arm. That's a really different perception. Again, at the level of the sensory organs, the same thing is happening, but now because of the context and because of the way that the brain is organized and interpreted those sensations, this is a wildly different perception than sitting in a movie theater watching a scary movie with someone you're interested in. So we're giving meaning to those sensations. The perception is the conscious experience of the environment. And we're going to go through this perceptual process to talk about this level of sensation and getting to the level of perception and just this conscious experience of the environment. That's what we experience, right? So everything I'm going to be talking about is under the level of conscious awareness. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you that these green questions are questions for you to think about. When I'm going to take a couple of seconds to pause here, and I'm going to do this for a couple of seconds, but in class I usually do this for a good minute and a half or so. I sit there and just kind of be meditative for a moment. I do want to, so we're going to skip to the second green question, which is actually a statement. I want to really encourage you here. I'm going to do this again at the end of the PowerPoints to encourage you to bring awareness to your perception over the course of this session. Every time you're bringing awareness to your perception and that conscious experience, the more you can think about and apply some of this background processing that is going on for you to have this experience and to be really appreciative, I think. But I'm going to do this piece of just being quiet for a moment and asking what you perceive. So let's have our moment of silence. And again, please pause for more than a second or two. So What do you perceive right now, or what did you just perceive during that moment? Pause. In my background, I can hear a particular bird chirping over and over again. You have a different background, and again, please take these moments to stop, pause, and think about just your perception of what's going on right now. So I just skipped one of the demos in the book, and I hope you are reading your textbook. It's a really good demo to go through to create a perceiving machine. Again, we usually do that in class, but I felt like that's one of those things I don't think will translate well at all to a voiced over PowerPoint or a YouTube video. But I do want to do this. Why study sensation and perception? One is the recovery of function. So if you think about how something like a cochlear implant was created, or how now we are learning how to directly stimulate the optic nerve, this recovery of function is because of the study of sensation and perception. So this is one of those places where we have this basic science and we've translated it to find a way to improve human life. We can also design a better environment, which is in quotes, and I hate the overuse of quotes, but I've taken them out, put them in, taken them out. Environment is so broad that I think it deserves to be in quotes in some ways. The very first, so please, if you can go into your PowerPoints and click into any of these, if you're at all interested in sensation and perception for sort of the perception and performance and how we can design a better environment, or what the human factors people call usability. That first website is the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, if I've got the last couple letters correct. And then the second website is the Just Noticeable Difference. That's a website that has a really great video on it that I'm going to put the link in again to try and get you to watch this, designing an environment that makes you happy. Because a lot of the usability people, so a lot of these people who basically they go on into graduate school and get their PhDs in perception, part of what they're trying to do is to create a better environment. I have a really good friend who who has worked at Dell and PeopleSoft and not Boeing, but Lockheed Martin, several places, including Landmark Institute for Research and Training, as making education more usable for people who struggle, who learn differently. And so you can see that he's using that background in perception and performance to find different ways to make different kinds of environment more user-friendly, or different kinds of environments more user-friendly. So this is a huge thing. I worked with a lot of what we called flyboys. As the Lockheed Martin shows, they were doing the kind of heads-up displays in aircrafts. I had another really good friend who worked with anesthesiologists to try to make their machinery more streamlined so that they would make fewer mistakes. We're trying to design a better environment. So again, taking that basic research and really applying it to, in this case, performance and making things more usable. Third is pain management. So one of the studies that we'll talk about again when we talk about pain was Andrew Portnoy. I probably have that first name wrong, but he was the first person who was in one of these virtual reality research studies. He was working on his motorcycle, and the gas tank exploded, and he got third-degree burns over something like 42% of his body. And so he had to be debrided. And if you know what this is, they're basically taking these bandages off, but there was no skin. So it's all on these blood vessels and things, and it's very painful. And the first time they do it, they do standard care, and he rates his pain on a scale of 0 to 10 up at a 6. I feel like I would be higher, but I'm a wimp when it comes to that kind of pain. Then the second time they say, let's use the virtual reality. And it's, to me, even a kind of boring virtual reality quote game. of I'm in a kitchen, there's a spider, I chase the spider into a disposal and I grind it up. And that's the quote game. But because he's in his virtual world, he's completely distracted, right, from the fact that they are debriding him and pulling, he's not watching them pull this off of his blood vessels and off of his arms and legs and such. And so he rates his pain as down at like a 3 or a 4. So it looks like virtual reality is actually more helpful for pain management than video games or pleasant music or other distractions that people have done research looking into. Fourth, robotics and computers. So the thing that we just skipped was creating this perceiving machine, and I usually go on for a while and gush about the fact that I'm a bit of a sci-fi nerd and I really enjoy learning about robotics and watching science fiction about AI and so forth, although the new AI does scare me. But if we go all the way to creating something that is sentient, like Data in the Star Trek The Next Generation, we are nowhere close to that. And we thought we would be closer to that. If you go back and look at some of the television shows, even the cartoons back in the 50s, as soon as they got those or created those huge computers that took up a whole room at the time, there were all these shows that had these robots that could help us, like The Maid and the Jetsons, or the Lost in Space, Danger, Danger, Will Robinson. We're really far away from that. We have computers that can do a lot of things with the ones and zeros, that have the sort of almost like the brain power, right? So the RAM, the random access memory, as well as the ROM, as well as the ability to store memory and to use that and bring it up and all of that. But the thing that catches us up the most is perception, actually. One of the things that catches us up the most is just figuring out how humans move their eyes, how frogs move their eyes. What causes us to move our eyes? Well, it's these little teeny tiny structures in the midbrain called the superior colliculi, and we don't really understand the superior colliculi, so we don't know. Usually the way we create some perceiving machine is to have lots and lots of cameras and sonar and other ways to, quote, perceive, so that they don't have to move their eyes or move their cameras around based on the environment. Anyway, so robots, computers is another thing. Inherent interest, or just the appreciation. I am again going to encourage you so many times to stop and appreciate and think about your own perception. I was a kid who, I'm going to probably tell you this many times, I was struggling with my eyesight. When they discovered I needed glasses, they told my family, she's been legally blind for quite a while. So I played these perceptual games for quite a while with myself, and we drove in the car for a long time. I would play these little perceptual games. And so this class, when I was your age, answered a bunch of my questions about my own games that I played with myself, these perceptual games. So inherent interest, appreciation, and again, here's a website. Go, especially if you're at all into optical illusions, this is a super fun website. And there's always new illusions on the front page, but you can click into all kinds of really fun and cool illusions that by the end of this class, some of which you will be able to explain, some of which we might not get to movement and depth and so forth unless someone tells me that in their interests, that that's what you want to hear about. Finally, I know my dog's making noise, and so finally, but this is too long for me to stop. A greater understanding of your own and others' perceptual experiences. So I'm going to talk about normative perception, but I am encouraging you to figure out how to apply this to, we're at this level of sensation, we're experiencing the same thing, but by the time we get to perception, we have processed things through many brain regions, and depending on whether I'm a quote normal person or whether I have some paranoia or whether I have some depression or whether I have some anxiety. All of these things mean that that subcortical processing, all of that processing that happens before the conscious experience, it changes the conscious experience. So one of my examples between sensation and perception usually is also to say that my brother is schizophrenic. And I know that when we're sitting next to each other and we're sensing very similar things, even though my eyes are bad and my ears are bad, I've listened to lots of loud music and I have some damage. We're listening to the same thing. When he tells me, so the sensory organs are basically gathering very similar information, just slightly different because we're slightly separated. We're not in the same exact spot. But by the time that information, the words, the sounds, and everything gets to his higher level processing and his conscious experience, he has a wildly different perception than I do. And this greater understanding of not just my own experience, but other people's perceptual experiences. So everything is filtered through perception. And other people are simply perceiving the world differently than I am or than you are. So for the rest of the session, I'm again saying to pause, stop, bring awareness to your perceptual experience and think about some of these perceptual processes sometimes in that pause. Vision, hearing, smell, taste, feeling our bodies, all of that is going to be discussed. And again, most of the discussion is going to be pretty scientific and is going to be the processing that happens under our conscious awareness. And so think about your conscious awareness and think about how much goes into that experience. I am again here going to encourage you. I'm going to put the URL for the Don Norman, the www.jnd.org, that just noticeable difference. And actually, you have to scroll down and go to the video that is about design that makes you happy, or I think it's called emotional design or something of that nature. So all of those videos, a couple of them are short and funny, but this one's about 15 minutes, and it is more about design that makes you happy. And I think it's important because we kind of ignore that a little bit in my field. We don't think about what makes us happy necessarily. We think about just how is this happening? So I come from what they call cold cognition. How are we thinking? What we're thinking? How are we processing? But there is something to be said to looking at design that makes you happy, and I really like that video. My niece is a graphic designer, and she's always been very interested in feng shui and designing things so that they flow nicely in a nice way. So watch that video.